Shannon Kemp, and I'm the Executive Editor for Dataversity. We would like to thank you for joining today's Dataversity webinar, Leading the Data Asset Management Team, CDO, or Top Data Job, moderated today by Eileen Berkowitz from our partner at Data Blueprint. It is the second webinar in the series, Enterprise Data Webinar World Series, a series to help build a year-round community for those who have attended and hopefully will attend the annual Enterprise Data World Conference and Expo. Just a couple of points to get us started. Due to the large number of people that attend these sessions, you will be muted during the webinar. For questions, we will be collecting them via the Q&A section, or if you like to tweet, we encourage you to share highlights or questions via Twitter using hashtag EDW13 or hashtag DataEd. And as always, we will send a follow-up email within 2 business days containing links to the recording of this session and additional information requested throughout the webinar. We are excited to continue the conversation regarding the Chief Data Officer, so without further delay, I will hand the controls over to Eileen to introduce today's panelists and webinar. Eileen.
Thank you, Shannon. Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Eileen Berkowitz, and as Shannon mentioned, I'm the webinar coordinator here at Data Blueprint. We are super excited that you found the time today to join us when we talk about the exciting topic of the Chief Data Officer. And again, a big thank you always goes out to Shannon and Dataversity for hosting us, this time as part of the Enterprise Data Webinar World Series. We'll get started in just a few moments after I introduce your speakers today, and also let you know a few housekeeping items that way you can expect. We're planning a total of 1 hour, so feel free to use the chat feature also to submit questions throughout the presentation, and towards the end we'll try to answer questions as they come up, but also have time at the end. And as Shannon mentioned, yes, if you're active on Twitter, submit your questions there as well. We'll keep an eye on the hashtags EDW13 or DataEd. And yes, Shannon mentions that today's session is recorded. You'll get access to the materials. And we also want to thank all of you who in the time before this webinar helped us with some of our research for this topic and actually completed our Chief Data Officer survey. We'll be discussing some of the results today, but Peter and Micheline are also working on a white paper that will be released in the upcoming weeks. So keep an eye out for that. And those of you who provided us with your email address, you will receive a copy of the results as well, now that the survey is officially closed. So now let me introduce you to our speakers. Both of them are highly regarded as experts and thought leaders in the data management industry. And if you're planning on attending Enterprise Data World, you'll see both of them there in April presenting. Micheline Casey is principal at CDO LLC, a boutique consultancy supporting the development of large-scale enterprise information management, data governance, and data security strategic plans and implementation efforts. She also authors the blog Data Trending at datatrending.wordpress.com. And prior to CDO LLC, Micheline was the first state chief data officer in the country and part of the governor's office in the state of Colorado. And Dr. Peter Aiken, many of you may know him. He has more than 30 years of experience and has received many awards for his outstanding contributions. He is the founding director of Data Blueprint, and he has written 7 books and thousands of articles. His latest book on the topic of the top data job or chief data officer is scheduled to be released in about a month or so keep an eye out for that. And with that, I'll turn it over to both Micheline and Peter and let you get started with today's discussion.
Great. Thank you, Eileen. Peter, if you can move to the next slide, please. Great. So why are we interested in this specific conversation? This is the third, I believe, in the series from Dataversity on the role of the Chief Data Officer. And today, Peter and I are going to be discussing the title of Chief Data Officer itself, the name, or is it better titled something else? We're going to go through a few themes that you've all seen outlined, including where does this role sit, who should this role report to, who are the peers, et cetera. But the question is, why are we interested in this specific conversation? So our assumption is that almost all of you on the phone understand what's been happening with data trends over the past several years, so we're not going to go back through all of those statistics. However, we're talking about more than just big data, right? It's the drive to manage all the data, be able to integrate it, be able to collaborate with others across the enterprise, and as an organization be able to be more innovative and be more agile in ways that weren't available even a decade ago. Next slide, please, Peter. So we know that there's been a huge disruption in the way IT in particular has been organized due to all sorts of new emerging technologies and the amount of data that's coming on top of this. From my perspective, at least, and Peter and I will go into this further, this has forced chief information officers much further into the infrastructure and technology role with huge portfolios of assets to manage. Next slide, please. Companies that are trying to stay agile and nimble are finding that chief marketing officers and others aren't waiting for IT to keep up anymore. They want and they need more data, and they need it now, and they need it at the point of touch. While CIOs are dealing with back-end systems, connectivity, and trying to deal with bring your own device and other user needs like that. And what we're finding as CMOs, chief marketing officers, and others across the organization are starting to take more data upon themselves, we're creating more silos. There's no cohesive strategy about how to manage that data or leverage it across the organization. It's a diversion of budgetary dollars that are spent. There are battles over who owns the data, and there's less rationalization across back-end infrastructure, data standards, et cetera. So Peter and I are going to, next slide, Peter. Peter and I are going to talk about the role of the chief data officer or the top data job, go into several areas which we feel are particularly important to this conversation. But as you'll see through our survey results, even we in the industry aren't in agreement as to whether or not this role is actually needed. So we're going to dive into all of that today. And Peter, I'm going to turn this back over to you.
Thanks, Micheline. I have to point out that Micheline and I met we think it was about 8 years ago, and we were working on a project here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and we found out that the state of Colorado had actually appointed a chief data officer. And we went, wow, that's phenomenal. It's a really good thing. And if you know Micheline's record, she accomplished some really, really tremendous things there. And so we were trying to get our state, Virginia here, to pay attention to this as well. And we got into, a lot of back and forth on it. And again, sort of 8 years worth of frustration later, we're actually now collaborating on this thing and trying to come up with some of this. But as most of the rest of you guys know, we don't have all the answers here as an industry. This industry is very, very new. The idea that we need a chief data officer is a new concept. So we're very interested in your feedback, and that's why we set up all the social media here for you guys to interact with us, ask us questions, and work our way through this series of topics that we have here. As Eileen mentioned too, and again, I want to extend my thanks as well to those of you that helped out with the survey. We've got enough responses here that we can actually talk about some statistically significant results. And this was one of the first ones that came out on this, which is that, the question is, does your organization need a CDO? And you'll see that right away, the purple part at the bottom, 53% said yes. But when you tease the data apart a little bit further, Micheline, maybe you want to address that little 25% up there too. We also set up a series of comments fields so we could ask you guys some very much more in-depth questions. And Micheline, as you went through there, you sort of gleaned a little bit about that 25% too, right?
Yeah, so if we look at the specific comments, as well as the blue box, which is 7% yes, we're currently in the process of creating it, over 60% in total indicated that their organization did actually need a chief data officer.
And some of those 25%ers were also yes, but, and they gave us some additional information. So we were thinking it's actually much higher than 60%. One of the things we'll be presenting at Enterprise Data World is that we've actually looked around and said, what is the size of the market for these things? And we've got some really good information that's going to dive into that as well. Interesting, the only people who said, no, our data is not important enough to warrant our attention, that was 1%. And I think that's probably going to hold true all the way through. 6% out there said, no, our CIO is covering these responsibilities. And again, that seems to map onto the types of things that we're discovering as well. So I want to be real clear here with a disclaimer. When we talk about a chief data officer, we're talking about something in the way of a position that is designed to relieve some stress on an already very highly extended position in here. And so we do believe that it's important that this stuff get taken care of, but yes, you'll see as Micheline and I go a little further in this, we may not be entirely in alignment with how best to make that happen. So just up front, I'm taking a rather extreme position. If you want to think about it, if you want the exercise where I'm at, go to a doorway and put your hands at your side and raise them to the edge of the doorway and press on that doorway for about 30 seconds, and then walk out of the doorway. And what you'll see happen is that your hands will lift by themselves. It sounds like a bizarre exercise, and I'm sure everybody in the audience is standing around a doorway and they can go and try this yourself. But what I'm looking at is, after doing this for 20 years and working with this, we need to take some extreme positions here, because what we have been trying has not been working. And the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So let me move on to our series of things that we wanted to interact with you all on this. First one is, what is in a name? And I'll dive in right here. When somebody is called the chief officer of anything, whatever it is, the chief of police, they have something. We impart something to them by calling them a chief. The head of the police department is the ultimate authority who gets to make a decision whether we're going to arrest somebody, or how the various laws are enforced within the governance body. A chief risk officer is the individual who knows and understands risk management in an organization. By the way, that's a similarly new and evolving position, and we're seeing actually a lot of good interaction between CDOs and CROs. In the medical domain, again, we're working in a town that has the fourth largest medical research facility in the country here. The chief medical officer of that facility is the person who's responsible for all the medical decisions that occur in that organization. And our chief financial officer, of course, as well, is the person who is the expert and authority on financial activities within the organization. Now, when you give somebody the chief role like that, they get this sense of entitlement and gravitas, and a couple of other words that we could throw in there as well. It's a term for respect. And this goes back to the comments I was making about a CIO. When we call somebody the chief information officer in an organization, about 10% of them in our surveys actually are qualified to make important decisions about data, which means that the other 90% of them that are out there have simply never had the opportunity to learn about this, and consequently never gotten good at making those decisions. And our research shows that time after time after time, one of the major problems that organizations have managing their data is that they have bad decisions that are made up high in IT about those decisions. Now, let's take one more step too. I don't want to blame a lot of this on certain individuals or certain types of things, but we also have challenges with the way things are done. For example, if we had it to do over again, I'm absolutely certain that most of you all would agree with me that master data management is really a bad name for that field, and that what we should be calling it is master definition management, and that would make a whole lot more sense to people. So we label things wrong. We do this. Well, CIO is really a mislabeled position in 90% of the organizations that we work with out there. And so when we look around and say, well, who is the chief officer that is for information? We've got one. Lots of organizations have CIOs, and they say, well, that's the person who takes care of the information. But when you look at what chief information officers do, and we worked with a lot of them collectively, yes, they do some things that have to do with information, but what are the other things they do? They spend their time worrying about the email system, backup and recovery, application software. In other words, it's a lot of technologies. So our contention is that the chief data officer is needed because the chief information officer is really much more of a chief technology officer instead of a chief information officer. And that really is, unfortunately, unintentionally misleading an awful lot of organizations. So when we say chief officer that's there, and we say it's a chief data officer, then we want that chief data officer to be focused 100% of the time on data that goes on to that. So Micheline, I'll turn over to you and let you make a little comment on that, and we'll see what sorts of feedback we get as we start rolling towards this.
Great, yeah. So this next slide is really just about, the title itself, Chief Information Officer versus Chief Data Officer. And I guess I've always put the stake in the ground, and because I have been in the role, and I love the term Chief Data Officer. I think it speaks to exactly what that person's doing, overseeing and managing the data. Whereas the Chief Information Officer at this point, I feel like that should be changed to Chief Infrastructure Officer, or change the title to Chief Technology Officer, because they're not doing with data and information what they really should be doing with data and information, and that is paying attention to it and partnering with the business to really understand how to leverage and optimize it. But again, this role, as you mentioned, Peter, is really still evolving. There's no one right way to do it. We're not even in agreement as to whether or not it should exist and what to call it. But I guess my opinion is data flexibility. It should always be on, and therefore somebody should have responsibility and authority for it as a shared service of the organization.
So another one that we've come across is that people are saying that they should be called the Chief Information Technology Officer, and that seems to be a very reasonable title too, because they're responsible for all of the information technology in the organization.
The CIO, you're saying?
That's correct.
Okay.
We could call him a CITO, Chief Information Technology Officer. But both Micheline and I are trying to get to the point of, look, we're in IT and business, but people who are outside of IT and outside of business don't know. So the last thing we want to do is make it difficult for them to figure out what our jobs are. Oh, I want to talk to somebody about data in the organization. Well, that would be, they would think the chief officer. And yet it turns out that it's the Chief Data Officer, according to the world of Peter and Micheline on here. Sorry, I'm putting a piece of technology in place. So when we look at these things, the name is important, and what is in the name and what is in the title is important for organizations, because people understand so little in general about technology that they're not really sure where to go and what to do. So we're putting the question out there for you all. We did ask the question of the survey, but we're interested in your thoughts as well. So let's see what sorts of feedback we get on this, and Tim's taking a look at this. And we did ask the question, as I mentioned on the survey here as well, does your organization currently have one, or are you in the process of getting one? And this was very interesting for us, because as we did this, yeah, CITO, as Gwen says, so that's an excellent piece that goes in there. So anyway, our survey here, again, there are some groups that are doing this, and we looked, just so that you guys can walk through the chart here, 6% of them, that individual will report to the CIO. 4% of them says they're going to report to the business, and another 4% says it's a joint reporting role, and I know that a lot of people have been comfortable with that. But the question is data an IT asset, or is it something else? And I think that's a question that we're going to have to work everybody together to get. So again, we'll look for your feedback on that, and let's move on to the next component of this here, which is that, okay, we've got a name and a title. Who are these individuals' peers? Who should they be reporting to? Where should they be reporting? Et cetera, et cetera. I also need to tell you guys the story, too, here, because Micheline and I went back and forth on the name on this, and I eventually got dissuaded. I was originally going to call this the top data job, just because I have some issues with the way many CDOs are being implemented. But here's the way Peter would like to see the world work. We have assets in the organization, and the assets include operations, finance, marketing, top information technology job. Data is an asset. It's a business asset. And as a business asset, that business asset should be treated no differently than the other business assets. Although data is a little bit different from other data assets, and we'll get to that in a little bit. So it's even more special, if you will, than some of the other organizational assets. So in Peter's view of the world, we have these people who are reporting to the top job, whatever that is, CEO, president, whatever we're going to call it. And data as an organizational asset for many organizations warrants somebody paying attention to this. Now remember, I said I was going to take an extreme position because I believe we've been not paid enough attention to over the years, and we'd like to get some more attention at the top level. The Chief Data Officer here would be providing input on there, but in addition to that, the Chief Data Officer would work with the Chief Information Technology job to talk about the spend that needs to go on in IT, and that should be a cooperative conversation instead of a dictated conversation, which is the data people almost always find out after a software package has been purchased, that software package was purchased. And Micheline, I'll turn over to your slides on this one.
Yeah, and so just before I jump into what I was going to talk about on this slide, as a state chief data officer, I actually reported to the state chief information officer. There were structural reasons for that within what we were doing in state government in Colorado, and part of that was actually that the state was undergoing an IT consolidation, and the governor had just created a statewide chief information officer role and had set the office of the chief information officer up in the governor's office. So we were Switzerland. We were neutral. We weren't housed under any other agency. We were part of the governor's office, and we needed to be shared services looking across the organization. So from that perspective, it made sense that my role was reporting to the chief information officer, though generally speaking, for the work that I do, I advise my clients to have the chief data officer sitting on the business side of the house, not the IT side of the house. So to go from Peter's slide of sort of a traditional organization structure into mine, which is really a look at how the chief data officer role should be organizationally aligned. This is a C-level role, which I believe should have an enterprise focus, should be able to work horizontally and bust down silos across the organization, as well as to improve coordination and collaboration across all of the different operational units of an organization, or even with business partners across the ecosystem. I do wholeheartedly believe that the CDO should actually report to someone on the business side of the house, whether it's the chief executive officer, the chief operating officer, or someone like that who's got the broader business view and business focus that today the IT side of the house does not have. That CDO should have authority and responsibility. They should be partnering with the business side. They should be aligning the enterprise data strategy to the business strategy, and really understanding how the data can be leveraged and optimized across not only the enterprise but the entire ecosystem. But as Peter mentioned, partnering with the chief information officer and chief information security officer on technology strategy, technology enablement, and the back-end operations that really need to occur in order to leverage and distribute data across the enterprise as needed. Peter, do you have anything to add to that?
No, and I think that's good. I think that one of the things that everybody should know is that you're speaking from the school of hard knocks here, because I've heard the stories that you've told of having to grab legislatures and say, look, you guys need to pass a law to make this sort of thing happen. And people are really kind of confused on that. And we've got a couple questions out there about some of the federal government guidance that's been provided. I don't know that we'll get a chance to get into that, although there seems to be some interest, so maybe we could hold another session on that at some point. But really, when you look at some of the conflicting laws, and I was involved in writing some of the early laws that were involved around data as well. There's a law in the federal government, for example, that says you can't buy software unless you can prove it complements your existing IT infrastructure, and I doubt anybody's ever been prosecuted for not doing that, but it is a very complex environment. And notice that Micheline and I are staying entirely away from regulatory issues, which is another whole can of worms that we get into there as well. So let's move on to this next topic here then, again, just to keep the conversation going. Where does one obtain the requisite background to qualify for this? Micheline, as far as I can tell right now, there's not many people that have had a CDO job who can claim they're good at being CDOs.
There are a few of us out there, but there's not and certainly there's no certification program for it and no degree program for it. And I did love the results that we got from our survey on this, because I thought they were really, really insightful. You got the first one up, Peter. Do you want to talk about it?
So as we collected information from you all, we asked the questions, what are the key qualifications necessary to be a CDO? And you can see we've arranged them in decreasing order. So the number one piece was experience in operationalizing data governance, data stewardship, and data quality. great, no problem with that. And you can see they work their way on down. But what possibly is of interest to you all, and Micheline pointed this out as we were looking through the data, is that notice all the green stuff to the right on this thing. These are normally the technical positions. And I don't think either Micheline and I are saying that we shouldn't be doing technical things in a chief data officer function, but that clearly people are talking about some other knowledge, skills, and abilities beyond the traditional things. So we don't want the chief data officer to be the world's best data modeler, for example. I think we can both agree on that, right, Micheline?
Yes, well, and again, no, not against data modelers. They're awesome, but this is really about strategy and folks that are good in understanding and grappling with strategy across an entire enterprise, again, across an ecosystem, depending on what sort of environment you're in. If you're in healthcare, for example, you're not just dealing with claims processing anymore. You're dealing with health information exchanges at the state level. You're now partnering and collaborating more with the providers than you ever have. You're even partnering and collaborating more with your members than you ever have. And so the strategic leadership skills, the communication skills, the industry knowledge and experience, I think the answers that we're seeing here are really reflective of what goes into someone who really is a successful chief data officer.
Absolutely. We have a comment from a participant here that's a really insightful comment too, and I think we'll come back and touch around on it. But it says, needs to be an innovator to paint in the white space of this role and willing to experiment. And I think that's a really excellent comment, so thank you for the comment on that. Again,
it is, and I think, Peter, we actually get to a bit of that on the next slide, which is exciting. So we
do. So as couldn't have planned that one better in terms of the transformation. So this is what the questions. What were the qualifications necessary? Then the next thing we said is, as a CDO, what are the traits that you actually need to have? And this one was a very interesting one, although in Micheline and my mind, there's a little bit of disturbing message on the right-hand side of here. So Micheline, I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah, so one of the things that I found really interesting, probably the most interesting piece on this slide, is that only 29% of people said that a CDO needs to be entrepreneurial. And I think this is going to touch back directly on the comment that we just had. So whoever submitted that, thank you. I'm sorry I can't see names on my end of the screen here. But as we were scanning through some of the other survey results, what was interesting was that only 37% of organizations that have chief data officers actually have a budget, and only 46% of chief data officers actually have staff. So again, there's no playbook for a chief data officer. Most of these are startup or startup groups, startup operations within large organizations. 2/3 of them apparently aren't being funded. Only 50% of them are getting staffed up. So you really do have to be a true entrepreneur, a true innovator, a change agent in the organization in order to get done what you really need to get done. The person who can, if you look at the definition of entrepreneur, it's someone who can organize and manage any enterprise, especially a business, with considerable initiative and risk. And I would say, particularly with the chief data officer role being so new and the amount of risk that we're seeing, particularly in highly regulated industries with privacy and security of utmost concern, these are risky endeavors, and folks who are in these roles have to get really creative sometimes on how they're going to get their work done, how they're going to collaborate across the organization, how they're going to get people bought into the vision when no one's incenting them to be bought in. It's a different sort of mindset, and you have to have tolerance for a certain amount of failure, because a certain amount of failure is going to happen.
And Micheline, as well, the other part of this I think that's crucial is that IT has been seen by non-IT people as jumping from one fad to the next. So whether we're going cloud or agile or whatever it is, everybody seems to run in that direction for about a week, and then they turn around and change and go back in another direction. So even the survival of the CDO function, in my mind, is not guaranteed at this point. that goes on to this. So let me move on to the next topic here. And again, we're getting some terrific feedback and comments on here. Many of you are familiar with a responsibility assignment matrix. People call it a RACI matrix. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about that conceptually on here. And we're going to do this in the context of, again, the survey. What are the capabilities that a CDO organization should provide? So Micheline, did you want to hit this one, or do you want me to do this one?
I think we can go back and forth. I think most of these were pretty much what I had expected to see. Enterprise data governance, master data management, the data strategy piece certainly. I'm surprised more people actually didn't say enterprise data strategy. Information architecture is something that's a shared service across the organization. I'm surprised metadata management is not higher. But, you know, there are other capabilities that, depending on the organization, we could throw in there, and we just didn't have categories for it, right? You could have business analysts supporting you, depending on what you're doing and how much you're getting into business process reengineering or information flow diagramming or providing consultative services to the different business units that you're working with. You could have an analytics group. You could be the analytics group for an organization. You could be doing content acquisition and looking for external data sets, whether from the data, major credit bureaus and data brokers, to open government data sets that you could be pulling into the organization. And you could certainly have a change management capability within the organization. So I think some of these are going to be really dependent on the organizations themselves and what they're trying to achieve.
I think that's certainly an excellent comment on there. On the other hand, though, and we're getting a couple of comments on the Twitter feed as well, that these look like very traditional data skills. And so I want everybody to keep in mind Micheline's comments prior to this of, yeah, it's fine to think that you're going to set this up and let it run, but it's not going to be self-sustaining. They're not going to do it because it's good. They're going to do it because they're getting some business value out of the results of this. So again, these are things, Micheline, that you've had in the past that you've looked at on these.
Yep.
So we had a question here, just would you include physical and electronic records management as part of the CDO's organization? And in my mind, data absolutely is part of that, and so the guidance of this goes into it. The actual technical delivery of this, we've got a couple slides we'll share with you a little bit later on as we look at this. Micheline, did you want to speak on this slide at all, of the CDO primary activities? Yeah.
Let me just jump in as well. I don't distinguish between structured and unstructured data when I'm talking about data in that way when I'm looking at capabilities. So my view of the world, to just answer that question again, I think the chief data officer is responsible for all the different types of data across an organization, including electronic records management, including collaboration platforms that might have data that are leverageable across the organization. And so I think that the key is to make sure that we're being able to leverage all the data assets of the organization, not just those sitting in a structured database. So this is, so responsibilities and activities. So primarily, I think the chief data officer is responsible for the enterprise data strategy. And this is a document that outlines what is it about the organization's data that is of utmost importance that supports the enterprise business strategy, and how do we prioritize and execute on things that are important and critical to the success of the business, so that we are spending our time, our money, et cetera, on those high priority items and not chasing down rabbit holes and not providing value back to the business. And this requires a partnership with those on the business side so that you really understand what's going on in those business units, what's important to them, and how you can really optimize and leverage those data assets. The data governance and architecture pieces, I think, are critical from a CDO perspective, because those are the glue, right? That's what will ultimately connect things together across the silos, across the organization, whether it's policies, processes, standards, whether it's conceptual and logical data models, this data security piece. is probably one of those things that I don't think enough folks are paying attention to. But obviously, as we get more and more into privacy regulations, I think it's more important for the chief data officer to have a voice, because the chief information security officer is more focused on network and perimeter security, not focused particularly on application or data security, and not looking certainly at how we can still share information across the organization while still protecting the rights of the data individuals on whom we have data. And then finally, I think the last big bucket that I've got on here is supporting legal compliancy and budget, right? So this means as the chief data officer, you get what's going on with your regulatory environment, whether those are international laws, national laws, state laws, and you can crosswalk and understand at a data element level what can and can't be shared, and all of the business rules around that, so that you can help support that with your internal data distribution networks. This role can get involved with procurement and contracts, so we've got standardized language, et cetera, and then ensuring coordination across funding and budgeting efforts. One of the things that I don't have on here is actually the culture change support, because I think the chief data officer is really a change agent to the organization. And culture change can encompass everything from just more communication and promotion about what's going on with data governance or information architecture. It could be monitoring and getting feedback so that we can better improve governance policies, processes, et cetera. It's helping providing training and education across the organization about why these activities are important and what the organization gets out of it. And it could be helping to develop new metrics or performance indicators so that we can reward people for doing the right things around data. Next slide, Peter. So if we were just to look at this from a sort of pyramid perspective, again, the chief data officer is responsible for strategy, aligning budget and funding, procurements and contracts from a governance side, regulatory compliance, enterprise policies, processes, and standards, and then the things that I sort of call the multiplier effects. How do we optimize and get the most leverage out of our data, whether that's through information architecture so that we know how to connect data across these silos, whether it's in working with the IT teams to develop control points in the systems development lifecycle or agile methodologies so that we're leveraging data and we're thinking about data in advance of actually beginning to build something, or establishing data governance and data quality programs. Peter, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so one in particular,
yeah.
The real key, and you hit this on your previous slide, is that everything we do in the data world is architecture dependent, whereas some of the things that people do in the IT world are architecture dependent. And so it's absolutely crucial, and this speaks to, again, some of the frustration, but also some of the really horrendous errors that we've seen corporations make over the past 20 years. And that's not just corporations, governments, whatever. So we won't pick on any one particular group. But once you have implemented an architecture, whether you've done it consciously or whether it's been done unconsciously, that architecture, the consequences of those architecture are with you then for a long time afterwards on that. And those components are going to be, you're stuck with them. So it's really clear that at this point here, the CDO is the person who's going to be establishing the basis for architectural development in the organization as they move forward on this. Micheline, we actually had a comment on one of the Twitter feeds of somebody saying, are there any sample enterprise strategy documents out there? I'm sure there's some. I don't know that anything right off the top, but maybe we can come back to that in the Q&A section and see if we can come up with something as well. Only thing we wanted... Go ahead.
It would be harder to find probably corporate data strategies. Those are going to tend to be proprietary in nature, but for government organizations that have a chief data officer or have put out a data strategy, those would generally be public domain source of documents and probably easier to get your hands on.
And this is an interesting thing. I'd like all of you who are listening to this to imagine yourself having just been hired as a chief data officer for some organization, and we'll pretend you're reporting into the chief operating officer of the organization. One of the conversations that you get to have with that person is, what do you get to do and what do I get to do? And these RACI matrices are things that you can put in place to say, hey, this is how we're going to set these things up and the kinds of things that we're going to be trying to do. So this is an important component that we want you all to work towards in order to that. But let's move on to our next topic here, otherwise we're going to run out of time. So how is data fitting into the software development lifecycle or the systems development lifecycle? And I want you guys to go back with me about 15 years ago, where the managing director of one of the New York banks called me up because I had written a book called Data Stuff, and they had some problems with data stuff, and he wanted me to help. And he said, all right, so supposing I gave you everything that you wanted, show me how your data stuff would evolve the way my systems evolve. And I came to a very interesting realization. I hope you all find it as well. Systems development activities, whether we're building software or whether we're accumulating a system with a bunch of prepackaged softwares, is a fundamentally development activity. Now, what development means is that you start out with nothing and you end up with something. That is the nature of development activities. They are purposely engineered to create something where a capability did not exist before. That's interesting, but when we look at data, it's a fundamentally different process. Data does not have to do with creating stuff. Data has to do with evolving stuff. So the data evolution activities are very different. In fact, they are so fundamentally different that these two activities must be decoupled. And in fact, if you go a little bit further with this and talk about things like Agile, which is really interesting and has some good things, if you're in the middle of an Agile Scrum and somebody says, hey, go build me a database, yeah, absolutely, somebody can do it, but there's never going to be a chance at that point for somebody to say, should we build that database or should we get that data from someplace else? So our data process is an evolutionary activity which is fundamentally different and at odds with, and we shouldn't be attempting to fit into the systems development lifecycle. They are separate, they should have separate lines of budget, they should have separate goals and rewards, and most importantly, data is not a project. We'll come back to the data is not a project in just a second, but let me just give you a quick illustration on this. In the upper left-hand corner of your screen there, you see a little bit of gray, which is everybody's concept of an enterprise data architecture. It's something out there. I don't really know what it is. I don't know how it fits in with things. And if you start the path of doing some requirements, then somebody would naturally request out of that, well, let's go to the enterprise data architecture and see what sort of metadata we have to describe customers. And that information would come back and fit into and complement and hopefully inform the next systems development activity, which would be a design and implement activity. And then we take that organized system metadata and we move it on up. Each time we do this, we will get better at the process, and as we get better at the process, the number of requests that we have will increase over time, and eventually this will become part of the established practice, where people will now have a very good idea of what enterprise architecture and systems development activities look like. So if you have questions about that, be glad to take them offline. But again, my contention is that data is a separate activity. It precedes this, and that's why it needs a separate governance process.
Yeah, so just to build on that, Peter, so when I talk about optimizing data assets across an organization, right, we look at most organizations and how we've grown up from siloed systems, and you've got so much duplicate data laying around, but we still tend to collect duplicates of the duplicates because we either don't know that it's there or it's just part of somebody's process that, a customer came to the website, we need to collect this data and throw it into a database somewhere. People aren't consciously really thinking about, okay, we've already got data assets, how do we reuse those over and over, which is the point that you were making previously. And so I think looking at sort of the bottom row of my pyramid here, when I talk about asset optimization, step one before anything gets developed should be, what do we already have, right? We shouldn't be we shouldn't be regathering data that we've already got existing in the organization unless there's some really darn good reason to gather that data up, right? Maybe it's old, it's stale, we don't have the most recent data, or maybe we're missing a particular data element. Maybe we now all of a sudden want to do something with email and we haven't collected email addresses in the past, right? So we need to go back out and collect those. But these control points can help us identify where we've already got data, if we're allowed to reuse it, where it's sitting across the organization, help identify authoritative data sets, and start really leveraging and optimizing those data sets, reusing those data sets to the extent that you can, while still identifying gaps in and identifying what you don't have, so you can focus development efforts or collection efforts on those particular data sets. You're dead on in terms of metadata, right? It's hard to start a metadata collection out of the gate and get everything across the organization into that metadata repository. But over time, as we build different applications or systems, more and more metadata gets collected, which helps development efforts more and more, as well as information sharing efforts more and more. Data governance can also help in terms of just putting some controls around when we should be collecting new data, when we shouldn't be collecting data sets, et cetera. So I think that's the only thing I wanted to add to your really great slide there.
So I'll jump on to the next one then, which is, some of you may be familiar with the DAMA-DIMBOK wheel. Now, those of you that aren't familiar with it, DAMA is the professional organization for data management. We call ourselves the voice of data management. And in 2009, we did the first codification of what it means to be a data manager. So this wheel, absent the shading that I've put on there, is DAMA's articulation of what goes on. And you can see, as Micheline was just speaking to, governance is at the heart of an awful lot of these activities that are in there. But in our minds collectively, and I think we agree on this one, Micheline, as well, everything on this wheel by default goes to the business, and that the two pieces that I have shared in green, metadata and data security management, are shared with IT, and that the only things that remain over on IT alone are the data development and database operations questions. And that, I think, actually answers one of the questions we had on the Q&A component, which was, where's the records management piece come in? So that can help to inform that one question. Micheline, I think we were agreed on this one, though, right?
We are. I mean, obviously there are some technology enablers behind many of those pieces, right? Whether a specific data warehouse or, a document content management system. The technology enablers are domain of IT, but all the work that needs to be done, the strategy that needs to be done, is shared by the business side or owned by the business side.
Exactly. So this is a radical change for what's going on. It means that IT shops aren't going to have as many people in them, and that people are going to be doing some things outside of IT with, again, different budget structures and projects. And, let's think about this from the highest level perspective. If I need to create an enterprise data architecture and provide capabilities so that the organization can use data as a strategic asset, which is what we're trying to do, that can't happen within a project domain. It doesn't work, and it hasn't worked, and so we should stop trying to make it work where it's just not going to do. So we've got one more topic here as we head to our Q&A session on this, and the question is, why are these issues aren't better understood? And this is pretty straightforward. Now, those of you that don't know, I'm a college and university professor, and what do we teach business people about data? And the answer is absolutely nothing. They sort of pick up that it's important, and they'll get it in part of their courses, and it's the stuff that goes into the Excel spreadsheets. And of course, what percentage of these business people deal with data daily? And the answer is 100% of them. So we have a huge, huge skills gap on here. And it's even worse on the IT side. When we look at what we teach IT people about data, it's appalling. We give them one course, graduate or undergraduate level, and there are a few exceptions. Let me call out NIT's data quality program and the University of Arkansas's Little Rock campus are both doing some terrific work in that area, and there's a lot of others. The University of Washington, I know we keep a list at DAMA on this, but the typical exposure that IT people have had about data is they get one course, and that course is how to build a new database. Now, first of all, let's ask the question, why are we doing that? Because 80% of IT spend is on improving existing IT assets. So why would we teach smart young people how to do 20% of the job that they really need to do? What impression then do IT people get from this kind of education? They get that data is a technical skill that is used to develop new databases. So is it any wonder that when we hand a data person a data problem, they build a new database? It's what we trained them to do. It's not the best way to go about educating people about data, and I mentioned this at the top of the hour, because data has some unique characteristics as an organizational asset. It is the sole, non-depletable, non-degrading, durable strategic asset available to organizations. Now, if my money was non-depletable, I would be very happy. If my car was non-degrading, I would be very happy. As a durable asset, it means it's something that actually has to be reported. And again, we get to the depreciation components, and as a strategic asset, of course, there's no question that it becomes critically important at that point. So we've taken smart people, and again, this is the reason CIOs don't understand this as well, and we've told them that explicitly IT leadership is not about data. That's a technical skill that needs to occur down in the bowels of your organization. And we have some other survey data. We can send you the scientific articles if you have an interest in looking at this, that show that over the past 25 years, the data people have been moved further and further down in the organizational IT structure. And it's no wonder that chiefs, remember I started out by saying CIOs are really smart and really good, and if you don't tell them that this stuff is important, they won't know. So the chief information officer is actually having policy implemented by some sort of a database person who's way, way down in the organization, divorced from not just the organizational strategy and the goals and objectives about what's going on, but in fact from what's going on in the day-to-day world. So the day-to-day disconnect between the data people and the rest of the IT staff is absolutely phenomenally large. And Micheline, I'll let you make any comments on that one before we get to the Q&A piece there.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously we need to get more classes in front of our college kids, particularly on the business degree tracks and the MBA programs. But there's also ways in corporations, right? If you go in as a new employee or even annually, most corporations now will make employees go through some sort of a online security training program, right? Like we've all seen that, we've all had to do that. Might be some web tutorial on privacy or security, or don't pick up the phone if someone calls you and asks for your username and password. That's not IT. That's a phishing scam, right? Don't respond. So we've all experienced that, right? So what I would like to see is more companies actually doing that around data, right? And then beginning to educate their existing employees about data, why data quality is important, why data management is important, not from a technical side, but really why it's adding value to the business in the same way they do it with security and with privacy.
Absolutely. So we've got a couple of questions to start off here, and there's some really good ones here. First of all, several of you have written in and said, hey, I tried this as well in my organization, and I tried to develop and make the organization aware and do this, and IT didn't seem to care. And that's frustrating, and we share your frustration there. On the other hand, we do have to at least a little bit look at ourselves. And so one of the things that both Micheline and I have been working on is that it's fine to go talk to the C-level people about technical stuff, but they're going to be a whole lot more interested when you talk to them about business stuff. So, for example, I had a group that was trying to sell a data quality initiative to the C-level management. And they looked at that and said, I understand data quality is important, but we just don't have the budget for that right now. So we went back and we recast that into a metric that is used commonly by C-leaders in this industry, and it was sales per employee. And we showed them that a 10% increase in the quality of their data would result in the sales per employee going up significantly. Now, all of a sudden, we had the attention of the people at the C-level because that's a measure that they, on the golf course, compare against each other. They say, hey, how are your sales per employee going this year? And we say, wow, we went up this year. How'd that happen? Well, we improved data quality. That was a very good conversation as opposed to a not so satisfactory conversation that's there. So again, with that, we've got a few minutes here left at the top. We've got a ton of questions. I don't know where we're going to start. Eileen, any suggestions on this? We've got a couple people that have been coming in.
Yeah, so we have gotten a bunch of questions throughout, and I think some of them require more complex answers. So let's see.
So I think that first question there about the federal agencies.
Yeah, I'm going to read that one. So the question is, can you speak about U.S. federal agencies' perspectives as to who should manage data at an agency and perhaps relate to OMB mandates for managing data?
So I guess that question is directed at me.
I think so.
In particular, I mean, I don't speak for any federal agency since I'm not affiliated with one. But what we've seen over the past couple of years is an increase in awareness of the discussion around data as an asset in the federal space. There's been more attention. Part of it due to big data. But part of it is surely due to the increased amount of compliance and regulations from a privacy perspective that the feds are also having to deal with, and likewise with the Dodd-Frank Act, the financial institutions and some of the federal agencies responsible for that as well. There are a couple of agencies that have indicated that they're going to bring on board a chief data officer. I believe there are a couple that already have them. I'm trying to think. I think the SEC, it's either the Securities and Exchange Commission or the Federal Trade Commission, already has a chief data officer. And I believe that there are a couple of others that are in process. Federal Computer, we could put out a couple of articles over the winter time, so you could probably go back to fcw.com and Google those, and there might be some stats in there on the federal side or linked to perhaps federal data strategies. Certainly there are big data strategies that are being developed, but not very many enterprise data strategies being developed. The Department of Energy did develop one a couple of years ago.
So that's interesting. There's another component of this too, that is if you're having trouble justifying some of the things that you're doing and you're looking for guidance, a terrific group to go look for this guidance is GAO. Now most people think of the Government Accountability Office as being the people that come in and point fingers after something bad has happened, but the GAO actually fundamentally understands data and architectures in particular, and they've written some terrific reports where there's an awful lot of good information on there. I'm going to go on to the next question here, which is a very good one from Kevin. And Kevin, good to hear from you. But he says talking about data is important to an organization. Can you mute yours, Arlene? We're picking up an echo on that. No, mute that one.
Yep.
So he says talking about how important data is fairly easy, but proving data's value to the organization is not. So if you're presenting at the CXO level, and the example that I gave just a few minutes ago is one of the things we're talking about here, where you have people who if you're engaging the people in the corner office on data topics, they don't get it. They've not been educated there. They're smart people. They've never been told this is important, so they've never paid any attention to it. So you've got to speak their language. And turns out I've got a book coming on this in the second half of the year. It's called Monetizing Data Management, where we can dive in and look at some very specific examples. And since we've got so much lead time on that, I'd be glad to have some conversations with people about that. But Micheline, any thoughts on how to present this to the CX levels, people at the C levels?
Yeah, well, so you're absolutely right, Peter. This isn't about improving the data, right, or managing the data. This is about the story that's important to your C-level folks. And creating that story is really about understanding what's important to your organization. That may be driving additional revenue. That may be better consumer and customer engagement. That may be increased operational efficiencies. That's the story that needs to be sold. The data management and data governance helps you get there and is why, or is how you end up with improved revenues, better customer engagement, et cetera. But you've got to start with a story that from a business perspective tells the C-level what it is they're going to get out of it, why it's a win for them. And that'll generally tie back to, again, your corporate strategy. There might be, if you're a publicly traded company, there might be some things in your annual filings that are very strategic in nature and are wins for the executives because they're going to get compensated on it. A lot of different ways you can, if there's not a formal strategy written out, lots of places where you can go to get that. But again, that story needs to be told from the business perspective and why it's a win for your corporate executives.
So, Micheline, I gave you a good advertisement. We've got a couple of questions in here about people asking where can they learn more about what you accomplished at the state of Colorado. I've seen you present on this. Have you had a chance to write any of it up yet?
There have been a couple of stories that have been written up. One in Public CIO, Federal Computer Week did a story. I've done case study presentations across the country and in some other countries on what we did in Colorado. But, certainly I'm happy to have a conversation with folks as well. There's no per se written case study out that I could send to people, though.
And as mentioned at the top of the hour, both of us will be in San Diego to this, so we're happy to take you guys and talk to you offline or online, and you'll be certainly presenting on some of these and some other topics as well, Micheline. So I think Eileen's going to cut me off here because she's saying it's the top of the hour, and so I'll turn it back over to Eileen, and we'll tell you how we're going to finish up with this.
Thank you, Peter. Yes, I'm sorry. So many great questions, and unfortunately we ran out of time, but usually what we do is, since you all submitted them in the chat, we will include them in the follow-up documentation. So in that email that goes out within the next 2 business days, keep a lookout for your questions there, and we'll provide you with the answers. So I think, Peter, if you want to go to the next slide, we have some upcoming events there. So as mentioned before, if you're already signed up for EDW, you can look forward to seeing Peter and Micheline and many other great speakers there. And I think we'll get Friday is the early bird deadline, so definitely still sign up. You can find all the information you need online.
And if you look hard, you can meet Shannon too.
Oh, okay. Great. So that's where data diversity stands. And yes, so we have another webinar next month. We do this on a monthly basis. It's on unlocking business value through data governance, and then May we're focusing on demystifying big data. So hopefully we'll virtually see some of you again. And feel free to contact us if you have any questions. Like I said, you'll hear from us again in about 2 business days. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.
Thanks, Eileen, and thanks, Peter and Micheline, and everyone for attending, and for this great webinar. And thanks for all the Twitter chats and all the chat in the section there. It's just, I love it when it's on fire like that. As Eileen mentioned, I'll get the information out within the next 2 business days with links to the slides and the recording. And until then, I hope everyone has a great day.